entitled MIPA, What's That? My name is Vanita Ray. I am a co-director with the Positive Women's Network, and I'd like to welcome you today. Just a moment. I think I'm supposed to turn this over. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll do the LJ intro really quick, Benita.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, good afternoon, y'all. Buenas todes. This session includes English to Spanish simultaneous interpretation, like all the HINAC sessions this year. To access the interpretation, please follow the instructions that you see on the screen. You can click the globe that you see at the bottom of your screen, select the language channel in which you'd like, then hit done. If you're joining from a smartphone or tablet, just click those three dots in which you'd like to participate and then hit done. Si se está uniendo a través de una computadora, nomás un recordatorio de buscar ese globo terráqueo al fondo y luego poder seleccionar el canal de audio en cual le gustaría participar. Si se está uniendo a través de un celular, una tableta, van a ser los tres puntitos que van a estar en una esquina de su celular o tableta. So please just speak slowly during our session for the interpreter and enjoy your session today. Happy HINAC.
Thank you, Jose. So just a few housekeeping for folks to just please remain on mute so that we can make sure we can hear the speaker. And I will be monitoring the chat. And if any questions, I'll try to get them to our speaker. And remain muted. Put any questions in the chat. We'll try to answer questions in the presentation or at least by the end. And so it is, without further ado, my really absolute pleasure. I signed up for this session on purpose. I want to introduce our presenter, Timothy Jackson, who is Director of Government Relations for AIDS Foundation Chicago. I consider him a friend and met him in 2016 at HINAC #2. So it is a pleasure. And I look forward to this. And I give you Timothy and ask Cindy to start recording.
Thank you so much, Mama Benita. It's so good to see you and see so many of friends around the country that is doing the work in your communities to kind of root out the stigma and discrimination from laws that criminalize people living with HIV. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you all today to talk about MIPA, which is, of course, meaningful involvement of people with AIDS. And if you all would give me just a moment, I'm going to pull up my screen in just a moment. Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I am not the best when it comes to technology. So y'all just pray for me. Let's see here. Let's try this. Can y'all see this?
Yep, we can.
Okay. Let's see here. Alrighty. So what we're going to be talking about today is, of course, meaningful involvement of people with AIDS, HIV, which of course is MIPA, and exactly what that means for us. We have already done the interpretation portion of this. And so I always like to start out with kind of exactly, grounding the conversation and what we're going to be talking about today. And so I love this quote for former Senator and then President, of course, Barack Obama back in 2008, which, my gosh, that's a long time ago. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. And so that, of course, is a riff of from a quote from Alice Walker, author Alice Walker. And so essentially that really sums up and provides the foundation to what self-empowerment is, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and ultimately what meaningful involvement of people living with HIV and AIDS is. And so what we're going to talk about today, we're going to discuss again what self-empowerment looks like for people living with or vulnerable to HIV. we're going to discuss some opportunities for people living with HIV to get involved at all levels of decision making. And we will also discuss the importance of community-centered engagement and why and how that's important. I will say, if you all have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And Vanita is going to be kind of making sure we look at those questions as I go through the presentation, but definitely there will be time at the end because I really want a conversation. So I'm going to go through my presentation pretty quickly so we can have a lot of time to talk and talk about what this exactly looks like. And I also have some questions that you all put in ahead of today's session through the app. And so we'll be touching base on those as well as the 2 poll questions that I put in as well. So we'll get to make sure we get to all of those. So let's get started. What is self-empowerment? Well, the Huffington Post defines the meaning of self-empowerment as taking control of our own life, setting goals, and making positive choices. Basically, what that means is we understand what we're good at, what our weaknesses are, and we have belief in ourselves. We are, as people living with HIV, we are the best, our best advocates. We are the subject matter experts on living with HIV. Self-empowerment also comes from being hungry to succeed, hungry to achieve more in life, hungry to do the right thing, hungry to overcome any challenges that come my way. And so we are putting the onus on what we do is on us. And so we are leading those discussions. So by show of hands, if you all would, how many of you all have heard of the Denver Principles?
Mm-hmm. Let me see some hands. Wow.
You can either use your hands or you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'm seeing a few hands.
Good. That's what I like to hear. Well, for those of you all that are new to the Denver Principles and kind of conversation around self-empowerment, these are really kind of really the I hate to say this like this, but the 10 commandments of the HIV movement from the very early days, and they're still applicable now. But the Denver Principles were compiled in 1983 when advocates got together and really wanted to set the stage and the foundation of exactly what it means to be a person living with HIV, the recommendations for people living with HIV, and the rights that we're demanding. And so one of the key parts of the Denver Principles was we condemned any attempts to label us as victims, and we are only occasionally patients. We are people, as the document says, with AIDS or people living with HIV. And so we want to be very clear to who and what we are. And so the Denver Principles really kind of sets the stage for that. We also know that the Denver Principles also outlines calls to action for people living with HIV, including the ability to form our own groups with our own representatives, to deal with the media, to choose their own agenda, plan their own strategies. Again, we are the subject matter experts. Never let anyone tell you differently. Also included, which is a key point that I want to hit today, that we should be involved at every level of decision making, and specifically serve on the boards of directors and be directors and executive directors and CEOs of these organizations. Again, when we talk about community-centered engagement, that's what that looks like. And then finally, be included in all forums with equal credibility as other participants to share their own experiences and knowledge. Again, I'm going to reiterate, we are the subject matter experts. And so whether you have been diagnosed with HIV for 30 days, or whether you have been diagnosed with HIV for 30 years, your voice, your advocacy, your experiences, your knowledge bring a lot to the table. And so we want to always center those experiences. Let's see. So what is meaningful of involvement of people living with AIDS, or MIPA. MIPA is not a program or a project, but a principle of engagement. This is not one thing that you check off. A lot of times when you hear MIPA, a lot of people want to, well, we have a community advisory board or consumer advisory board. Oh, we can check MIPA. Nope, that's not it. MIPA is ongoing. It does not end. And so we want to always be mindful of that. It's about ensuring that all of the communities most impacted by HIV have a seat at the table. And Shirley Chisholm, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring your own folding chair kind of thing. Are involved in the decision making at every level of the response. So whether that is the epidemiology part of it, whether that is being executive directors, whether that is being on the board of directors, whether that is leading conferences, whether that's starting your own organizations or doing work on social media, all of these things, we are supposed to be at the table leading these efforts. And not just, I want to make sure that I am very clear, not that we are happy that we just have a seat at the table, but that we are leading the discussions. Okay. MIPA realizes the rights and responsibilities of people living with HIV, including their right for self-determination, also the participation in decision-making processes that affect their lives. Because ultimately, the decisions that are being made around HIV impacts us daily, whether that's access to healthcare, whether that's expanding funding for housing opportunity for people with AIDS or HOPWA, or whether that is increasing funding for access to PrEP and PEP, whether that is overturning laws criminalizing people living with HIV. We need to be at the center of all of those discussions, leading them. And then, of course, it's something that we have learned, and we all know, that it's important that everyone has a seat at the table and a microphone. Again, I will never settle on just making sure that we are able to go click, a checklist. Oh, we have a Black gay man at the table. Okay, we checked it. No. Make sure everyone has a seat and a microphone, and make sure that it's on. And so we want everyone to feel engaged. That's what community-centered engagement is all about. And so make sure that we that all populations are included: Black, Latinx, Indigenous communities, of course, the broader LGBTQIA plus community, cisgender women, immigrants, sex workers, people who inject, young people, long-term survivors, everyone. And if I forgot anybody, or a group, call me out on it, put it in the chat, because even if you do this work, you can unintentionally leave people out. And again, that's unintentionally. So make sure that you speak up. If someone is leaving a group out that you think needs to be highlighted and at the table, say something. Because I think all too often we don't say anything and these things kind of fester. And so if someone has not called out a particular group that needs to be amplified and lifted up and affirmed, make sure you do that. And so this is definitely a safe space for you to do that today. No hard feelings at all. There are a number of different ways that we can look at involvement of people living with HIV, and it can take many forms. And this is just really kind of a word graph, I guess is what you would call it. We look at it, of course, personal self-empowerment. We talk about making sure that we take control of our own health conditions, and the things surrounding our health and our treatment options. I say all the time, self-empowerment does not just look like us sitting in a boardroom talking about policy, but it is also sitting in an examination room and a provider telling you something that you disagree with and you speaking up. That's self-empowerment too. And so if that provider or organization is not providing you the care that you believe that you need and deserve, you have a right to fire them and find someone that can. That's self-empowerment. That's being involved as a person living with HIV. I mentioned moments ago, about the policy making process. participating in the developing and monitoring of HIV-related policies at every level. You know, here at AIDS Foundation Chicago, we primarily work on state and federal issues, but we also keep an eye on Chicago and Cook County too. And so that may look a different, you know, way, you know, whether you're in Jackson, Mississippi, where I'm born and raised, or Alabama, across the South, or across the country. Again, being involved in that policy making process. And if you're sitting in rooms and you don't feel like an issue is being talked about and amplified and lifted up, it is definitely completely right for you to bring it up. Make sure you highlight it, because that's how we really get community-centered engagement. When we put all of the potential issues that are the people living with HIV in our communities are experiencing, bring all of those to the table. Campaigns and public speaking. We all know this. People living with HIV are spokespersons in campaigns. And I'm not talking about one person in a campaign of 25 people. You know, if we are doing a campaign to encourage, you know, Black cisgender women getting tested for HIV, there needs to be Black cisgender women in the damn commercial. Like, it's just, I don't get what the difficulty is in understanding that. You know, again, that's about being very community centered. Then the other one is leadership and support group networking and sharing. Again, it's important that we rely on other people living with HIV. Again, I'm going to say for the nth time, we are the subject matter experts. And so 9 times out of 10, if you're going through something, one of us has also gone through that. And so, you know, need to lean on other people in the movement, in the community as well. And then finally, it's the advocacy part. People living with HIV advocate law reform and inclusion in the research agenda. And so whether we're talking about biomedical interventions, whether we're talking about stigma reduction strategies, harm reduction, HIV criminalization, access to PrEP and PEP, any of these, housing, transportation, other social determinants of health, the intersections of criminal justice and racial justice when we talk about HIV criminalization, all of these things are to be brought to bear to talk about. And so when we talk about community-centered engagement, ooh, fancy. It means that AIDS service organization and community-based organization boards of directors reflect the communities impacted by HIV. Raise your hand or put in the chat if you've seen a lot of these ASO or CBO organizations where they don't have anyone impacted by HIV on them. Just put in the chat, raise your hand if you've seen that kind of up front. And that shouldn't be. If you're an AIDS service organization, you're receiving funding from Ryan White, people living with HIV should be at the center of it, of the decisions that are going on in that agency. Community-centered engagement means that everything an AIDS service organization or a community-based organization does is rooted in community. And whether that is communications, prevention strategies, programs and services, everything needs to be run by community. Because, you know, I will tell you as a former board president of an AIDS service organization, we can sit up in a boardroom all day and say, well, we think this would be good. Well, if we don't have buy-in from community, we have just wasted time and effort. Because had we just taken the time to stakeholder community, they would tell us that's stupid. We're not going to do that. And so that's the reason why it's always so important to engage community. I mentioned the whole point about communications. Lord knows we've seen enough commercials and whatnot where you look at communications and it doesn't look like people impacted by HIV. And that's a problem. And whether that's billboards, radio, in print, commercials, make sure that is so very, very key. Also on the prevention strategies. I mean, I'm going to talk about this in just a few moments. A prevention strategy for Black cisgender women is completely different what a prevention strategy is for Black trans women. Okay? Or Latinx men who have sex with men, or same gender loving men. All of these, like, oftentimes we see a one size fits all approach when it comes to prevention strategies, communication methods. That's not community centered. We understand that these communities are very diverse. They are not monolithic. And so our prevention strategies, our communication strategies, programs, and services need to reflect that. And so this community engagement takes many forms, including, again, community input and service design, monitoring and improvement, regular use of data to analyze retention, loss, and follow-up issues. It also looks support and assessment of staff performance. Again, if you have this nasty woman that's sitting up at the front counter that is always nasty and rude and got a stank attitude, that does not make people feel welcomed and affirmed. And so it is absolutely your right to
Tammy,
bring that
Tammy,
up.
yeah.
Yes.
Tammy, last.
Hello? Okay. Let's make sure everyone is on mute.
Yeah, I'm double checking and putting in the chat, but I'm trying to keep an eye on it. But I wanted to interject one thing when we talked about identifying the community folks that we were calling out, and someone did mention that we verticals that weren't called out. So
absolutely, and my apologies for that. For those of y'all that don't know what verticals are children that were born with HIV. And so I definitely thank you so much for calling that out and calling me on, and I apologize for that. And so we want to make sure that everyone is listed, and I will add even another group that I did not mention are cisgender men, heterosexual men that are impacted by HIV, that are not all gay or bisexual or same gender loving. And so we want to make sure that we highlight that group as well. And then that final point is continuous quality improvement. And exactly what that means is, are you involved in that agency's quality improvement about no-shows, appointments, how long it takes for you to see a provider? All these agencies track all of these different things. And so you shouldn't be sitting in a waiting room for an hour. That should not be happening. And so make sure that you get your voice heard about that as well. Oh, and let me say this final one, and I put this one in big red writing. Community-centered engagement is more than a consumer advisory board, a meal, and a $20 gift card. I cannot tell you how many times that this suffices, and it should never suffice. First of all, I want to get rid of the word consumer.
Thank you.
Because consumer indicates or implies that we are only taking from the system and not putting back in, which we know that's the case. We know that we bring a lot of value to these organizations, to these spaces. And so I want to get rid of the word consumer. And so this community advisory board, we don't want it to be, a lot of times it's an afterthought, or oh, well, we need to get community. And we've already put this program together. We've already received the grant funding for it. We've already done this for it. We've already done this for it. Oh yeah, now we need to check in with community. Nope, wrong. That's backwards. It should be the other way around. And so it's so frustrating for me, and I'm sure many of you all as well. Also, we have to put value in people's time and their sharing their story. A meal, I don't care how good it is, and a $20 gift card, or maybe a token to get on public transportation, or whatever these menial little stipends that we give aren't good enough. And so if we went and hired the best consultants to do all of these different things that we want, we would pay them handsomely. And so we need to pay and provide the proper recognition of the people that are impacted by HIV, that are giving of their time, of their energy, of their story, of their experience, and we need to recognize that. And that's more than just a seat on a consumer advisory board, you know, some chicken tenders or dry piece of pizza and a $20 gift card. So 5 steps to successful community-centered engagement. Plan for the long term with transparency at each step. I just kind of mentioned that, but that's essentially making sure that community is centered from the very beginning, from the ideation stage. As you're kind of thinking through some things, oh, this would be good, you know, wondering if this would be good, as you're sitting there and kind of, you know, throwing around some things that you're thinking about, bring community in. Because what we know happens is once you bring community in on the front end, there's already initial buy-in. Because people are bought in because they've been included from the very beginning. Imagine way engagement would go is, say I'm a builder, or I'm building you a home, and I buy the property. You know, I didn't ask you where you want to live, but I bought the property. Beautiful piece of property. I build a 2-bedroom house, even though you have 6 children. I didn't ask you that. You are a person that loves to cook, but I gave you a little galley kitchen because I didn't ask. I've already poured the foundation. You're somebody that likes, you know, movies, you know, Netflix or whatnot. And so you wanted a home theater, but your living room or you don't have a den. And then once all of that is done, I hand you the keys and then say, what do you think? That'd be crappy, wouldn't it? Because see, you've done all of the work, but you never engaged people from the very beginning. Because had you, you'd found, I don't want to live on the north side of Chicago. I want to live on the south side. That, you know, I have 6 kids. So this little 2-bedroom, it's not going to work. You would have known that I love Netflix and Hulu and all of that. And so I would have wanted a large den or a home theater, or that I love to cook and I wanted, you know, a 6-burner stove and a Sub-Zero, you know, refrigerator with granite countertop. You would have known all these things. But what we oftentimes see with community, lack of community-centered engagement, is that all the work has been done and checking in with community is done as an afterthought. So if you're seeing those happening, call it out. Call it out. Never be afraid to call things out. Secondly, identify community priorities. As I mentioned earlier, we are not a monolith. And so you can have different community priorities inside the larger, say, HIV community. Because again, what a Black or Latinx trans woman needs or deserves is completely different than, you know, a Black gay man. And so you have to understand that, and that the priorities may change, and they oftentimes do. Design projects that reflect the community priorities. How many times have you given your feedback on something, and then when you look at the final product, you're like, what in the hell is this? It's like they didn't pay attention to it. And so that's a part of client-centered engagement too, calling them out on it. Mobilize resource investments, and that's really tapping into some of the things that are in community. Meaning, if I wanted to do, if I had in my head, I wanted to do this harm reduction program, but I don't know how to do that. Would I, one, try to go do this program anyway? Or I would stop what I am doing, go and try to find people in the harm reduction space and bring them and say, this is kind of what I was thinking about. Does this work? What do you all think? How would you change it? Do you think it's stupid? Do you think it's something worth doing? All of these type of questions. Because again, it's about buy-in. It's about getting community engaged in what you're doing. And then finally, as I mentioned at the outset, community engagement is ongoing. This is not a once and a done. This is not a check, checking some off a list. This is ongoing. This is because you realize that you may have to change priorities, or you've done what you initially set out to do. So you need to kind of reorganize and say, well, what's next? And so it's ongoing. This is not a once and done thing. And so a large portion, I'm going to be wrapping up in just a moment. I want to open it up to questions too. Why sharing our stories is so important? Again, as I mentioned, we are our own experts. In fact, many grants, requests for proposals, including components for community input. And so if you are in a city where you go to an FQHC, FQHCs by law have to have community input on their boards of directors. And so make sure if you're interested in serving on the board of directors for the agency where you receive care, reach out to them. Reach out to your case manager, reach out. I'm sure there's some type of, the front desk associate can provide you information about that. And then of course, the voice of people living with HIV is necessary. Again, provide our perspective. We're the subject matter experts when making major strategic decisions that affect us. Again, how are you making decisions that affect a group of people that you're not asking how it affects them? That makes no sense. But unfortunately, that definitely goes on. Secondly, get feedback on the way current services are experienced by community. And it can be something as simple as, I remember in Alabama, the city bus would always bring, clients would drop off at the clinic at 7:40. Well, the clinic doesn't open till 8. So what do you do for these 20 minutes? And so we had clients that said, it sure would be nice if y'all had some benches out here for us to sit on while we wait for y'all to open. Something that simple. We went and bought some benches. That's speaking up. Or it could be completely like current services that just aren't working. Or if they have, if an agency has a session, an affinity session, but it's during the day and you work during the day, tell them, hey, I would really like to participate. Can we look at having one in the evening? That's speaking up too, because you understand how important your voice is in your experience. And then raise new issues of concern from community. And that goes without saying, because again, you can sit in these ivory towers of these rooms, and you're very tunnel vision in what you're doing. But if you're not reaching out to community constantly, you don't know what those important issues are. And so this is just a quote that I found from Iyanla Vanzant. When you stand and share your story in an empowering way, your story will heal you and your story will heal somebody else. And so that's really at really the heart of what we do. And so as I conclude, I do want to let you know that the awesome work that you do in your community matters. Never let anyone tell you differently. Always remember that your work, your voice, your time, and ultimately your passion matters. Let your voice be heard, and that there is value in your advocacy, and the power of your voices ring loud and clear, and you have a story to tell, opinions that count, and a difference to make. And so without further ado, I will open it up for questions. I know we have, Benita, how much time do we have left? We have about 20 minutes left, I think.
Yeah, we do. We're here till, 3:45 Central Time, 4:45 Eastern.
Yeah. So what I am going to do, this is my contact information. I'm going to leave this up for just a few moments if you want to jot that down. And then we can go into some of those questions that we had pulled up. And I will also put this information in the chat. Or if one of my colleagues from ASC, if you all don't mind putting this in the chat.
Oh, sweet.
So I will stop sharing and let's see the questions that we have.
you had questions from the app. I haven't seen questions. I'm not seeing the Q&A here. Hold on.
Okay.
I'm not seeing this. Yeah, I have not seen questions. I've seen a couple comments, and mainly folks talking about the benefit of acknowledging the diversity. We learn so much from each other, the importance of the authenticity of our voice. Sustainability is one of values, and we value the whole person and paying the person a living wage. This went to the issue of that gift card, and not to say, you know, just like our kids, we don't say only $10, but when a $1 million organization gives me $10, it's a little different than mama.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I was just gonna add. I know we had done some polls. Let me see if I can pull these up. Let's see. I don't know how I can pull up the.
We have one question that's going to come up, but you want to try to get yours up first? And
no,
then
you can go ahead. You can go ahead, because Lord knows you know, I told y'all I am challenged when it comes to technology. So you can go right ahead, Benita.
Okay. But they didn't put it. Susan, are you trying to come off mute for your question? I think you can. Hold on a minute.
Oh, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here goes. Hi, Tim, and everyone. It is so good to see you. This is amazing. Hey, way back closer to the beginning, Tim, you mentioned something really good that I always like to even clarify for myself. How are you defining, or how should we, when we speak to people, be defining external resources? Just the grant money, just the funding, or all the other allies, not even just allies as people living with HIV? How are you defining external resources?
That is a great question. External resources, naturally, you think of money, but you can also think of community partnerships. We know that we don't do this work alone, and that we rely on so many coalitions and other community organizations that do this work along with us. And so that is huge. And whether those groups are small or large, and then also other groups that may not partner with us as much. Like here in Illinois, we were working on HIV decrim, and we had a number of organizations that AFC and some other organizations hadn't previously worked with. But because of this issue, they joined us. And so that's important too, to tap some of those external resources. And then also I would say we have a number of organizations, from CERO to Positive Women's Network to NMAC to AIDS United, that provide a, you know, Black AIDS Institute and many others, the Transgender Law Center, ACLU, Lambda Legal, and I can go on and on and on, of organizations that are doing this work that line up to what we're doing. And so a lot of times don't recreate the wheel, because you spend time doing that 9 times out of 10, somebody probably already has something similar that's already kind of been done, and you can just kind of tweak it for your group and kind of move on. But that's a great question. Thank you, Susan.
Here, I have another question from Kat Griffith. Hey, Kat, it says, we know the value of our experiences. I've struggled in the past to raise the ruckus that actually created any meaningful change. I know one suggestion is to obtain others to engage with me, but any other suggestions? She wants to know, do you have any other suggestions about how do you get some effort or get some support to raise that ruckus?
Sure.
To get meaningful by yourself.
Yeah, I will always go where there are 2 or more gathered. That always helps. And so if you are experiencing it, 9 times out of 10, someone else has too. And so, of course, there's always power in multiple voices. If you're talking specifically about an organization, there is usually some type of way to file a grievance through whatever that process is. And that way you can make those comments known. Share it with your case manager is another way, because a lot of times case managers are involved in the quality improvement part of the conversation that we mentioned earlier. And so that's a way of getting those comments into. And then you can always write you an email or a letter to the CEO, president, executive director, whatever the title is, or to the board president, and say, hey, these are the problems that I'm experiencing. This is a problem. Why? This is how I would like for it to be resolved. And then provide them, I'm going to give you a week or two to get back to me about this, and then follow up. Hold their damn feet to the fire. And so what that looks like is, whether it is a very large organization or a small organization, hold their feet to the fire, and don't let up.
Okay, that was our last one so far. I wanted to know if maybe you can talk a little bit. You use a lot of community-centered terms. There's the idea of community-led too versus being centered. Do you have a way to distinguish the two, or value
Sure.
one or the other?
No, I think both of them are just as important. Community-centered, I think I'm going to be honest with you, is the bare minimum.
Thank you.
That is the bare minimum, that it centers community. What we want is community-led.
That's right.
And so, we want to not just be sitting at the table, but we want to be leading the conversation, making the decisions. And so that's more on the community-led. The bare, like the floor, is community-centered.
Thank you. That was great. We have one question, and I guess, and I might be saying your name wrong, Rimsky. You're going to come off mute for a moment. You're a fellow Mississippian. Am I saying that right?
Jacksonian, yes.
Okay, Jackstonian. Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Benita. But my question to Timothy, as a Black woman living with HIV in Jackson, Mississippi, and now that I have gotten on the advocacy side, which is pretty new for me. I've noticed that a lot of the CBOs here, even on our policy council, there are no Black women. It's just the face of a woman living with HIV that is represented for women here. And it's pretty much, everything is pretty much centered around MSM and transgender, but not Black women here, not even to the point of strong support groups for Black women. And pretty much it's like, I feel like I've been here alone in the fight for women in Mississippi, because there's not a lot of Black women that are ready to come out of silence and live out loud. And so it's been a struggle even to get Black women to come alongside with me and to join me in the fight. So what do I do for is trying to mobilize women and engage them into the conversations that are living with HIV, and to be a part of these policy councils and CBOs and things like that?
Yeah, that is a great question. And thank you so much for amplifying it. I would tell you a couple of things. One, you mentioned support groups. I would definitely talk to your organization to see if there's possibility, if you could find interest from, say, 3 or 4 other people that would be interested in starting a support group. That would be extremely helpful. Another one is to tap into networks that are already there. And I say that specifically because we have the co-executive director of Positive Women's Network USA as the moderator of today's session, Ms. Benita Ray. And so that may be, some resources that PWN has for advocates in Mississippi, in Jackson, that are doing the work that we can get you linked to, because I completely agree. In so many spaces, Black cisgender women are often left behind, and they shouldn't be. And so I think that is a great way to link up with PWN to see exactly what resources that they have, and others, not just PWN, but others as well. The Cero Project, I'm sure, is one as well. And see if we can get you linked up with other people that want to advocate, but may not be as comfortable or don't really know exactly kind of where to start. And so, yeah, thank you so much for amplifying that.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to offer one other thing too. Is it was really important to, where did everybody go? Really important to say folks may not be ready to come out. So could there be a way to organize you know, not only people living with HIV, but those are not, so that the group is blended and folks don't have to stand out and be acknowledged for being a person living with HIV, but still want to have a voice. Other people don't have to know who's in the group, so that you still may get a couple people and it's not identified as just people living with HIV right then, until you get folks who are ready. So just a thought.
Yeah, I think that is a great point that you mentioned, Vanita, and I try my best to find a silver lining in everything. I think with COVID, I think this is going to be a good thing, because to your point, instead of having to physically be in a space, someone can still participate.
That's right.
You know, virtually, never have to come on camera. They can be completely, you know, anonymous, still be a part of the community, but it's on their terms, and they're doing it at their comfortability, and so, which is of course important.
Yeah. So we have about 8 minutes, and so I'm ready to take any questions from folks, comments.
Yeah, I will say, Susan put it into the question box for the app. How do we draw more people into activism and convince more people that meaningful involvement of people with AIDS is necessary if we hope to end AIDS? I will say this. First of all, that is a damn good question. And I will say this. We have to acknowledge, we have to meet people where they are. Some people are comfortable, some people aren't, and that's completely fine. But we have seen, when we don't center community, what happens. We get interventions that don't work. We get things that kind of fall by the wayside because you didn't tap into community. And so I think that's the reason why it's so important that, as you know, jurisdictions and states and even the federal government, you know, implements these ending the HIV epidemic that plans across, you know, the country, that we are involved, because these plans are about people living with HIV. You know, they can get all technical and policy wonkish, but at the end of the day, they're about people living with HIV. And so that's how we get people engaged. And then one more thing I would say, your activism can look completely different. I have absolutely no problem opening my mouth, none. But that may not be you. You may be someone that loves, say, graphic design. You can use your advocacy and activism for that. You may be someone that's not very good at speaking, but you can write some great poetry, or you're a great writer. That works too. That counts as well. You know, you may not be very comfortable kind of being on this type of stage, but you love social media and can get out information that way. That's advocacy too. It does not have to look like everybody else's to be effective. It just has to be authentically you.
All right, well, we're down to 6 minutes, and appreciate all comments, questions.
Yep. I see. I'm waiting to see if we have any more questions, but I do have a couple more.
Okay.
It says, why is it so difficult for those when decision-making power to include MIPA? Because it makes too much sense. Because it's an extra step. And because, to be completely honest with you, what meaningful involvement of people living with HIV and AIDS look like may run counter to what they want. They may have in their head a desired end for a program or for a service. But if you run this by community may actually tell us this is stupid. But we really want to do this program. And so that's why it's difficult. And I'm going to honestly be very honest with you. As I like to say, some people that are making these decisions have misplaced their tambourines. that they have been sitting in a lot of these seats for much too long. And it's time for them to move on. Thank you for your service. We are appreciative of your service. But if you are still doing things in HIV that you were doing 15 years ago, why? Like, why? That's why things haven't changed. Because what's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And that's kind of where we are right now.
Timothy, we're down to a couple minutes, but a quick question. Who gets to define what's MIPA? I hear organizations do MIPA, and then private may not meet my definition, but who gets to decide? Because I think it's community get to tell people if it's meaningful to us, but who gets to decide what's MIPA?
Absolutely, it's community. That's centered on community and should be led by community too. Because what's meaningful for board of directors that is meaningful involvement is that one seat on the community advisory board, that $20 gift card, that's meaningful. That's not meaningful. What's meaningful for us is that not only are we there from the beginning, but we're there at the end with the implementation part too. That's meaningful. And only community gets to make that decision. Only.
Wonderful. Well, we're down to the last couple minutes, and I really want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have time for a comment or two if folks want to let us know how they feel about the presentation. Let us know. Liz just said this has been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We got a good little group here.
Yeah.
But I always enjoy doing this conference. It's my favorite one because I know the work that each of you all are doing in your communities, small, large, in the middle, to really affect change. And so thank you all so much for spending some time with me. I put my number and email address in the chat. Feel free, call, text, email, and get back with you all. And if there's nothing else, I hope that you all have the great rest of your day. Thank you so much, Mama Benita, for moderating today's discussion. And I hope that y'all have a great rest of HIV is Not a Crime.
Thank you, Timothy. Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, y'all.